Since the ending of Bleach on the 22nd of August 2016, over 8 years ago, Bleach fans have been dealing with this lie or misconception. We've been told that Kubo was forced to end his masterpiece manga because of poor sales and the editors from Shonen Jump throwing him under the bus, and that he simply gave up on his own manga. All of these takes are mindless regurgitations from poorly researched YouTube videos or articles that people have read online. The truth about why Bleach had ended is so much more heartbreaking than any of these Bleach haters would have you believe. Kubo was drawing Bleach with a severed shoulder tendon for years without even knowing about it. While people were criticizing Kubo's work, this man was literally destroying his body one manga panel at a time, and he was too stubborn and dedicated to his craft to realize that his body was falling apart. The MRI scans that Kubo had taken didn't lie. There were partial fractures, torn ligaments, and a shoulder joint that had been screaming for help while he was hunched over his desk for years on end drawing his manga. This video is going to debunk once and for all that the Bleach manga did not end because of declining popularity, poor manga sales, or that the Jump editorial staff had forced Kubo to end the manga. All of these are incorrect, poorly researched takes that frankly have no sources to even back them up. It's just made up headcanon from people who don't like Bleach. So join me as we speak about Tite Kubo, the creator who sacrificed his health, his physical well-being, all because he refused to let down the fans who had believed in his vision. And despite this, there are still some morons who don't like how Bleach ended as they turn Kubo into a villain. So Kubo's issues during the serialization of Bleach had really started around 2011. For over a decade, since the beginning of Bleach in 2001, Kubo was pretty much a superhuman. Whenever he was hit with a cold, he'd just need 6 hours of sleep and medicine and he would be over it. In terms of fatigue, he was able to power through it, and he maintained what he called creative flexibility. This was the ability to adapt his storytelling on the fly, to pivot whenever inspiration had struck him, and to maintain that artistic spontaneity which had made early Bleach so incredible. But suddenly, as with age, everything had changed. Those 6-hour cold recoveries became week-long bedridden stretches. On the author notes for volume 58, Kubo wrote that I catch bad colds every year, but lately it is taking me longer to recover from them. I have always been prone to sickness and it is really affecting me now. I just hope that I can finish the series before totally collapsing. Now this was in 2013, 3 years before Bleach had ended. By volume 67, the situation had worsened, with Kubo mentioning that he had a cold all throughout January, and he sarcastically claimed the achievement of being sick for 1/12 of a year. These were early signs that his body was slowing down and it was unable to keep up with the hectic schedule of weekly manga serialization. The adrenaline rush of those weekly manga deadlines and the pressure that he felt from it had become Kubo's salvation and his curse. In the 2017 Jump Giga interview, Kubo explained during a manga series, you feel adrenaline and it rises to the surface, and you no longer understand your poor physical health. The body's stress response was literally masking the severity of his injuries, letting him continue drawing manga while damage was accumulating within him. Around 2013, Kubo lost what he called his creative flexibility. For 10 years, he could adapt, improvise, and pivot his storytelling. The final 3 years of Bleach were pure autopilot, as Kubo states that he was able to keep drawing as usual for as many as 10 years. He revealed this in a TBS radio interview. After the decline in my health, I was conscious about managing my physical condition, but by that time my physical condition had deteriorated so much that I had lost that flexibility. Now here's where things get really tragic. Kubo thought that all of this was his fault, and he felt pathetic as a mangaka because he couldn't maintain his own standards. His definition was clear. A mangaka is someone who delivers a manga with a set quality within a set time. By his own metric, he was failing, as he was not recognizing stating that his body was literally preventing him from meeting these impossible demands. The final revelation for Kubo had come after Bleach had ended. In the Jump Giga interview, Kubo described a month of truth, where after taking a MRI, his shoulder tendons were shown to be severed, and he stated that he had a habit of leaning his body weight on his left shoulder whilst drawing. Kubo says it seems that his shoulder tendon was severed because his shoulder took all of the load of his body. He was told that there was a partial fracture. The damage was so severe that it became awfully painful the next day after making the manuscript for the final chapter of Bleach. Can you believe that this man was drawing with a severed shoulder tendon for over a year and he didn't even know about it just because of the adrenaline from the weekly manga deadlines being so high that it masked the pain? So we've had a glimpse into the state of Kubo after the Bleach manga had ended, but what led up to the ending of the manga? We learn about the events 1 year before the Bleach manga had ended during a 2017 TBS radio interview with Kubo. So Kubo walked into his editor's office in 2015 and asked to end Bleach within 1 or 2 years, and this was because of his failing health. This wasn't because manga sales were tanking, and it wasn't because editors were pressuring him to end the series. It was because Kubo's body was giving out and he knew it. What was the response from Shueisha, the publisher of Weekly Shonen Jump? Well, they gave him exactly what he had asked for, considering that this was a man who was in service of them for over 15 years, so the least that they could do was listen to him. So Kubo had 1 full year to end the Bleach series properly. In his own words from the TBS interview, Kubo decided, not the editorial staff, that he'd draw Bleach to his desired conclusion. So even though there were times where he'd want to end the series prematurely due to his declining health in earlier years, he kept going in order to reach the end that he was most satisfied with. This wasn't some panicked cancellation within a few weeks' notice. Cancelled manga usually get 6 to 12 weeks maximum to wrap up. Series like Mama Yu Yu and High School Family were axed within months of declining performance. They were given minimal time to conclude storylines, and cancellations are only handed usually to new manga. Bleach was a well-established series that was running for over a decade. If it was in fact cancelled, it wouldn't have received 52 weeks. This special treatment is reserved for successful manga artists and successful series. Shueisha had accommodated Kubo's request, and it wasn't because Bleach was facing cancellation. But for some reason, there are some individuals who cannot accept the reality of the situation, as it becomes easier to blame the corporate executives at Shueisha, or that editors had forced Kubo to end the manga, or that the series was declining in popularity, or it had low manga sales, when none of this is true. The fact of the matter is that these haters who dislike Bleach and want to ruin its credibility simply don't like the series for one reason or another, and it's usually because they don't really understand Kubo's storytelling, and they were dissatisfied with the ending of the manga for one reason or another. These people are entitled to their own opinions, but it doesn't give them the right to make stuff up and to tarnish the reputation of one of the most successful manga series in the world. With these people perpetuating these myths, it belittles the hard work of Kubo and the suffering that he had endured in order to get Bleach across to the finish line in 2016, where he had ended it at a point that he was satisfied with. This Bleach manga cancellation myth spreads as it gives these haters someone else to point the finger at instead of themselves for having poor reading comprehension. Through Kubo's interview, he emphasized that he never felt pressure from the Shonen Jump editorial staff during the 15-year run of Bleach's serialization. The decision to end the manga was his alone, and it was made not from creative exhaustion or corporate interference, but from a simple recognition that Kubo's body could no longer sustain weekly manga serialization anymore. In 2011, when Kubo had really started to struggle with Bleach's serialization and he felt that he was at his lowest point and he was questioning whether if he had the strength to continue the manga, he had received a letter that would define the final 5 years of the Bleach manga. The letter had no return address, no name, it was just words from a dying child that would haunt and inspire Kubo to write Bleach up until the final chapter. Kubo had shared this letter with us on Twitter in hopes of finding the family of the boy who had sent it. We learned that the boy was hospitalized with an incurable illness. He had 18 months to live, Everything that used to bring him joy, from TV, games, friends, now would reminded him of what he was losing. His doctors and parents had tried to encourage him to enjoy his remaining time, but how do you enjoy anything when you're trapped in a hospital bed watching your life slip away? But suddenly the boy had discovered bleach, and for the first time since his diagnosis, he had thought of tomorrow, and the passing of each day didn't feel like a countdown to his death. As he was anticipating what the next day would bring, as he was looking forward to what would happen to Ichigo next, how would the Soul Society arc unfold, would the Arrancar be defeated, Bleach had given him something to live for, even when living felt impossible. This letter was written with the request that it be sent after the boy's death. This was unfortunately a kid who knew that he was dying, and he spent some of his final precious time writing to a mangaka that he'd never meet, asking him to keep drawing the story that made his last days bearable. His final request to Kubo was, "Kubo-sensei, please draw Bleach the way you want to, right until its conclusion. That's what I want to read." Kubo received this letter during his own dark period of questioning whether if he should continue Bleach. It hit him like lightning. He was a fan who had found hope in his work during the most hopeless situation imaginable. While Kubo was wrestling with his own pain and exhaustion, this boy was fighting for his life and finding strength within the pages of Bleach. Kubo responded by drawing an 11-page hand-drawn manga telling the story of the boy, and he posted it on Twitter with photos of the actual letter, and he launched a campaign to search to find the boy's family. The story exploded with over 180,000 retweets in less than 24 hours. There was a lot of news coverage and an outpouring of support, and it demonstrated how deeply the story had not only resonated with Kubo but fans of his work. A year later, in December of 2017, Kubo was successfully able to track down and contact the boy's family, and he finally was able to express his gratitude to the family of the boy who had saved Bleach just as much as Bleach had saved him. The impact of this letter had never truly faded. Every time Kubo's body screamed at him during those final 5 years of serialization, every time the pain had become unbearable, he remembered that dying boy's letter whose final request was for Kubo to finish the story of Bleach the way that he wants to. And it was this request that had helped Kubo to keep drawing. One of the main talking points behind this myth of the Bleach manga being cancelled is when people refer to it having poor manga sales. Now, I'm going to debunk this with some actual numbers, because I'm sick of some individuals continuing to spread these lies in the big ol' year of 2025 without even bothering to check the facts. Bleach maintained over 130 million copies in circulation worldwide when it had ended. So let's have a look at this chart where we see the yearly manga volume sales of Bleach. Clearly we see a peak of 6 million sales for 2009, with the numbers declining to an average of 3 to 2 million units sold per year from 2012 to 2016. What has to be noted is that these sales represent physical manga sales, and they do not include any digital sales. It was during this time that the advent of reading tablets and the Shonen Jump app, which has given manga readers an efficient way to consume their favorite manga without purchasing physical volumes. We have to admit that all physical manga volumes have declined because it's convenient to have a 74 volume series like Bleach that can fit onto a compact tablet or a mobile phone that you can carry around with you, and you can enjoy it in more than one location without having to carry a bulk of books with you. Being able to purchase digital manga volumes from various different online retailers means that yearly physical manga volumes have inherently declined as a whole for every single manga series, and this is not an exclusive problem just to Bleach. But the Bleach haters will have you believe that this is a problem that Bleach was only dealing with, which had resulted in the decline of its sales. To prove that physical manga sales have been declining as a whole, I'm going to compare the sales of Bleach to other series which have shown the same decline in sales. Compare the decline in manga volume sales that we see on the Bleach chart to the decline of volume sales of One Piece. At its peak, One Piece sold 3.3 million units with volume 61, which was the beginning of the New World portion of of the series. The decline in people purchasing physical manga is best shown with One Piece selling 1.7 million units for its 90th volume. This is a 49% decline in sales from volume 61 to volume 90. Bleach at its peak with volume 37 sold 800,000 units, and its final installment, volume 74, sold 440,000 units. It's a decrease of 45%. The drop in sales is equivalent to the drop in sales that One Piece has also experienced, and this decline is most likely attributed to the advent of digital manga or general fatigue in sales from long-running manga series. One thing is for certain though, if you're complaining that Bleach had declined in volume sales, then you should also be complaining that One Piece declined in sales to an equivalent extent. To further back up my point, let's have a look at Bleach's manga sales during its final few volumes, where the haters say that it was at its lowest point, and compare this to some of the more recent popular manga from Shonen Jump. So the first series we'll compare Bleach to is My Hero Academia. If you have a look, from volumes 9 to 24, after My Hero had its anime released, it was selling on average 420 to 590,000 sales per volume. Then from volume 25 to 40, it had peaked out at around just over 650,000 manga sales, before the sales level off to around 500,000 sales per volume. In 2009, Bleach had its highest sales from volume 37, which sold 816,000 sales. This is roughly 23% higher than the sales of volume 33, which was the peak of My Hero Academia with just about 650,000 sales. My Hero steadily declined to an average of just over 500,000 sales per volume for its final installments. What you have to remember is My Hero also had an anime that was helping to boost those manga sales, and Bleach in its final few years was attaining 400 to over 450,000 sales without an anime. So the point I'm making is that Bleach's final few volumes were selling just as well as the volumes of My Hero Academia. The next manga we'll look at is Black Clover, and we can see that it pales in comparison to Bleach at its peak. And it's also not even selling half of the volume sales that Bleach was during its final few years. Black Clover averages at around 180,000 to 250,000 sales in comparison to Bleach, which had over 400,000 sales per volume of its final installments. The third series that I want to compare Bleach to is Boruto, which starts well with 350,000 sales, but it declines to on average just below 100,000 sales per volume in recent years. Even at its best, it isn't selling as well as Bleach during a time when people believed that Bleach had minimal sales and was apparently cancelled. If you want to have a look at what actual manga cancellation looks like, then look at those new series that fail to achieve big numbers of at least 25 to 50,000 manga sales for those early manga volumes, as these series are typically given 2 to 3 months notice to wrap up storylines. As the publisher cuts promotional support, merchandise dries up, and the anime usually gets shelved indefinitely. Bleach got none of this treatment. Instead, it received a full year's notice to end properly, continued promotional support, and it maintained its position within Weekly Shonen Jump until the very end. This is how a successful manga series comes to an end, when their creator can no longer continue. And it was a very similar situation for Akira Toriyama, who was pleading with Shueisha to end Dragon Ball for years, and he was finally given permission to following the Majin Buu arc. And the fact that Bleach has now returned with this incredible renaissance, with the anime adapting the final manga arc, with Kubo as a general supervisor expanding upon moments that he couldn't include with the manga, proves that Bleach was not cancelled, and the anime returned at the perfect time where Kubo was able to help out with the anime staff, after he was given enough time to recover from the 15-year manga serialization of Bleach. Again, what Kubo experienced is not an isolated incident. We've heard horror stories from Togashi, Masashi Kishimoto, Akira Toriyama, and even Ichiro Oda about their insane working schedules, their declining health, and just how hard it is to be a manga artist. Those brutal weekly deadlines do create for a high pressure environment where again adrenaline masks pain. This Bleach manga cancellation misconception also spreads this narrative that Kubo had a bad relationship with his editors, which is totally incorrect. When Kubo announced his decision to end the series, his fellow mangaka responded with support and understanding. Oda had publicly stated within Jump, Kubo-san must be very tired after serializing Bleach for 15 years, rest well. This wasn't a reaction of someone anyone who believes that Kubo was being forced against his will to end the manga, it was a recognition from one veteran mangaka to another who understands exactly what 15 years of weekly serialization does to a human body. The editorial relationship with Kubo during Bleach's final years was actually collaborative and not antagonistic. Kubo had 7 to 8 different editors during Bleach's serialization, and this is the normal rotation of editors in manga publishing. In volume 61's author notes, he congratulated his previous editor who was getting married, as he says he is happy as if it was happening to him. This was during the final arc of the manga, and these are hardly the words of somebody who was locked in bitter conflict with the editorial staff. Kubo was not pressurized by his editors, and he maintained creative control over major story decisions throughout the series. Usually editors have a say upon the series if it's really popular and they don't want it to end, as they force the mangaka to continue, and this is well documented to be the case with Dragon Ball, as Toriyama wanted to end it several times but he was pressured to continue due to its success. There was a similar case with Death Note, where the series was that popular that it was forced to continue following a major character's death, which led to new characters like Nia and Mello being introduced, and the story did decline in quality as a result, as a lot of people don't like the second half of Death Note. But as far as I know, none of these situations were the case with Kubo. Kubo had very minimal editorial input. He chose which characters that he wanted to focus on, which battles to emphasize, and how to resolve long-running plot points with minimal input from the editorial team. The 1000 Year Blood War arc anime adaptation is the clearest proof of this, as Kubo is still actively involved with expanding his manga, as he is able to include all of the details that he was unable to add into the manga due to his declining health. The editors within Shonen Jump exist for a singular purpose, in order to guide new and upcoming artists through the early stages of their manga. Once a manga reaches the level of success of Bleach, then their input becomes minimal to non-existent. And this is also the case for One Piece, as One Piece's editor usually just takes the manuscripts from Oda and they publish it as is with minimal changes, unless there are errors in the typography or text. Even I have to admit that the final chapters of Bleach read like a sprint towards the finish line, which kept moving closer. Plot threads that seemed designed for extended exploration got resolved in single chapters, character moments that deserved full development were compressed into brief exchanges, fights had occurred off-screen, and by the end of the manga we didn't even know the fate of key characters like Yoruichi and Urahara. Kubo is rectifying a lot of these issues with the anime, and when Kubo says that he ended the manga the way that he wanted to, he is referring to the final 2 chapters, which is the epilogue of the series, as from the very beginning of the manga he had wanted Bleach to end with a next generation scenario showing the main characters as adults with families of their own. So yes, he did manage to write the epilogue of Bleach the way that he had decided since the very beginning. The reason why the 1000 Year Blood War arc was rushed was because Kubo's health was declining, and he knew this in 2015. It was him who had requested for the manga to end, which had allowed him 1 year to conclude the events of the story. So for 8 years, these myths and misconceptions about the Bleach manga being cancelled have perpetuated online. If you've seen the entirety of this video and you know somebody who is spreading these lies, then do link them to this video so that we can once and for all end this myth that the Bleach manga was cancelled. People have blamed everything from editors to sale figures to Shueisha cancelling the manga, but the truth is that the final few chapters of Bleach were made by somebody who was in agony, who was sacrificing his health, and in the end people were complaining about the dropping quality of the series from a mangaka who is trying his very hardest. So we've reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What do you guys think about those final few chapters of Bleach and the way that Bleach ended? If there's anything that I've forgotten to mention about the truth behind the ending of the Bleach manga, then let me know by continuing the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I cannot wait to see you in my next video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.